tiny fractures in the form. The days we live so much
All right. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Hope you all are doing well, having a great week so far. Good afternoon or good evening, good night, whatever the Truman Show thing is. Welcome to Midnight Hatter Live, the weekly variety show where we talk Gundam and gaming and some other things. But today
Yeah,
we're focusing on Adam and I's favorite things, which are Gundam and gaming. So,
that's right. Yeah.
yeah, I'm, of course, your host, Steven, aka Midnight Hatter, and joining me, as always, is the Gundam Explainer,
I
Adam
am
Blue.
I am Gundam explained.
Right?
No,
Yeah,
um,
the Setsuna FCA of explaining.
yeah, well, so here's something. On your channel, a lot of custom stuff and gaming stuff. So and I've teased this a little bit, but here's the final custom, Richter Belmont,
So
um,
awesome.
using the Fei Long body, the Ryu head, and then I just made like the bendable fabric there, bendable parts here, boots from a Mezco, and then I had to like cut and trim to get that to come together. But I think I only learned, I guess I had the motivation to do it just from learning about what I could do with Gunpla, and then like on your channel, you kind of deep dive into like, here's the easiest way you can custom anything. And I think it's just gotten to the point where I can do something like this. And I'm so proud of it.
Dude, it looks fantastic. I
Thank
and,
you.
having watched the whole process, like, the first,
Oh yeah.
iteration of the Richter that you made, and then seeing how you've adapted it since then, is just fantastic. Like,
That's fun.
and I feel like that's a totally, untapped market right now, so toy manufacturers, Hasbro, etcetera, if you're listening, custom figures, like, if you just sell a box of, like, heads and,
Yeah.
like, things like that, that there's I swear there's a huge market for it, and like I
It's
said, my
the
little brother
Roblox
does it.
or Fortnite aspect. It's that creative thing
Yeah.
people wanna create with stuff, and it's funny because Hasbro's almost gone in that direction, like, they made it where you can have your face, like, printed on a figure, and you can
Yeah.
choose what the figure is, but it's like, that was only part way there. You're right in which they should start selling packs that have. But, it's interesting, over the weekend, we were out of town and we stopped at this place that sells things cheaper, and they had these Hasbro basketball action figures. I don't really follow
Nice.
sports stuff, but my youngest wanted to get one, and it was really cool because just looking, I was like, man, Hasbro can do some amazing engineering when it comes to action figures, but I feel like they're not totally utilizing the potential for that. Like, I don't know what it is. Like, even Marvel Legends, sometimes it's like they're held back by something. I don't know what it is, but
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I definitely I have sort of particular tastes when it comes to action figures. Obviously, posability is great, but you don't want too many ball joints to where it's like just a bunch of
yeah.
like that's just too much, right?
Yep.
I think that like the GMG figures, the Gundam figures, they do
Mm.
a good job of using instead of like ball joints at the knees, they use like those hinge joints, but they double joint it.
Yeah, and in fact, those new like Jada toys, Street Fighters don't have any pins at all.
Yeah,
Like,
see,
and
that's
and
pretty
that's something
cool.
Hasbro's been moving into. But that's something I'm used to from Robot Spirits because, yeah, they're really good about hiding articulation, yet those are way
Yeah.
more expensive. This is 25 bucks, and it's one of those things where I wanna start seeing Amuro, a 6-inch high, I mean, SH Figure Arts is already doing, they did Witch from Mercury and Seed Freedom.
Yep.
Fig They need the classics.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that at this point, I'm probably never going to be able to get a Camille figure, let alone, like, the double Zeta figures like that.
I
Those
feel
terrifying.
like I feel like that has to happen, I'll be optimistic because when I first got into Robot Spirits, I was like, "Oh, there's so many more they could be doing." Stardust Memory, 08MS Team, Zeta, and then not too long after that, they started doing the Ver-anime of that stuff,
That's
so
true.
it's like, yeah, they could get there.
If a line is successful enough, they'll usually keep pushing it,
Yeah.
and I think that that's what you see with, like, the high grade Gunpla, right? Is,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
high grade has become, like, the staple of.
yeah.
But, yeah, that's enough figure talk. We're here to talk video games, and actually
Right.
the, thumbnail is probably a little misleading because, it's a little clickbaity. I was thinking to myself, like, well, first of all, I was gonna frame this discussion as the top 5, times that, video games really did capture what it feels like to be in a Mobile Suit Gundam anime, but then I saw this morning Adam posted the top 5, Zaku battles, and I was like, "Well, I can't do that now, like, I'm gonna have to reframe the entire discussion." No, but if you haven't checked it out, Adam's video this morning was fantastic. Igloo gets some love, so I appreciate that.
No, that's cool, and it's funny because it's almost like that, digital version of showing up with, like, the same shirt on
Yeah,
somewhere.
like, "Whoa,
It's
did you
like
guys
now no
call
one's
each other?"
interesting.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, I feel like there's only so many formulas you can structure these kinds of, discussions around. But I'm
Yeah.
gonna tell you specifically. Oh, go ahead.
Well, no, I was gonna say, yeah, you're right. Because really, I was just excited to just talk about Zaku's sometimes how badass they make them look in animation, and I'm like, "Well, how do I title this?" "Well, I'll just do top 5." So, yeah, it's one of those things, you know?
But there is a reason that I framed it around the Call of Duty thing because
Yeah.
and you'll see in just a moment why this inspired this, particular conversation. But yeah, I will give a shout out to the chat there, Robert. We've got so many of our usual friends here, including Robert, Ultronomus Jam Calex. I see that Zionic Shadow is in there.
Heck yeah.
Wallace, good to see you. Katachi, King Dylan, good to see you all. Thank you for
Yeah.
stopping by. I hope you guys are excited for this because whenever Adam and I get talking about video games, it's always a good
Oh,
time.
yeah.
So let me
Exactly.
hop into a little screen share view because I want to show you guys exactly where this conversation stems from. So the Call of Duty skins are out for Gundam. In total, if you were to buy all three, it's like $60. So,
Yeah.
and I don't even own Call of Duty currently anyway, so it's not something that I'm going to be playing. But there was one thing that stood out to me was those finishers, right? And the Gundam's beam saber finisher is right out of the first episode of the anime. Which
Yeah.
is so cool. Like, that to me, if you're going to do these types of add-ons and these types of, this type of content that's like crossover, cross-promotional content, you really do wanna capture the essence of what the original thing was, right? So this scene alone is like this is what makes it successful to me.
Yeah. I
And what's funny is that we don't even get this from most Gundam video games, right? Like,
That's
you
right.
you cannot reenact the Gundam beam saber through the Zaku moment in, like, any video games unless it's a
Yeah.
cutscene.
Unless after you swing, after you land, you press crouch if there is an option, and then you kinda just mimic that, but
Yeah,
otherwise, yeah. Yeah, the recreation of moments, of the feelings. Yeah.
yeah. So today, what I wanna do is, you and I are gonna kinda go back and forth and brainstorm about what existing Gundam games, because you and I have talked about, like, what our dream Gundam game would be and how we would capture that feeling of being in the one-year war. We're gonna talk about what games that are already out truly embody that feeling of being in the anime Mobile Suit Gundam.
That's a
Now,
good
of
one.
course, I'm like Walter from The Big Lebowski. I am the one who gives who gives a damn about the rules. So we do have some ground rules that we have to set before we hop into it. So for
Okay.
one thing, uh, because this would be an obvious winner in my eyes, and I'm
Yeah.
sure you would agree, right?
Yeah,
Like
that's right.
I think I remember in your review of this game, 0079 Rise from the Ashes side story, I don't think Gundam's even in the title.
Yeah.
Um, the only thing about this game that disqualifies it from this discussion is that it is a side story. It is not the core Gundam anime story, and so you can't recreate
Yeah.
those iconic moments. You can't recreate the Char kick or, like, you know, Amuro doing the last shooting, that type of thing, right?
Yeah, and that's a good rule, and you kinda helped explain to me because really the idea is how to get that essence, that feeling of Gundam as you're playing. But a lot of times, like, even for Rise of the Ashes, for me, this is like this makes me feel most like I'm in a mech. So,
Oh, yeah.
obviously, yes, but the way Steven is pitching this, I think is gonna be very interesting.
Now, in all fairness, there is did you know about the bonus disc for this game?
Yes, the Japanese version? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So there is an option where you get, the Gundam, the gun tank, and the gun cannon, but you don't get to play as them. You
I
play as the
know.
White Dingo team fighting against
Fighting
them, which
against
is
him, and
like
it is terrifying 'cause Amuro just comes in and just murders everybody, and it's like, "Okay."
yeah, it's like that level in Zeonic Front where you have to do research on the white base and, all of a sudden you start hearing Amuro counting off like 1, 2, 3, and you're it's like red leader down, blue leader down, like
That's awesome. I gotta get to that part.
yeah, it's so much fun. Now, there are games that do put you in the Gundam cockpit. One, including the memeable the memeable, dreamable War for Earth. So have you played this game or have you only, like, watched gameplay of it?
Yeah, I've watched gameplay. I tried to because I found a link of where I could download it, and I couldn't get it to run, so I gave up.
Dang, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's funny because in all of my searching online, I've only ever been able to find like cutscenes and things like that. The gameplay itself, like nobody ever shows it because it really is. So the gameplay is reminiscent of. Did you ever play the game Siberia on PS1?
No, but I know about that game where it's kind of like a, the older school style, almost narrative
Yeah.
or okay.
It's basically the proto of like the Quantic Dreams games, right?
Ah, okay.
Yeah, like the predecessor to that. Oh, and by
Yeah,
the way, um, for you guys in chat, drop in chat what you think is the most Gundam-y Gundam game, and we'll talk about those on stream as
yeah.
well. I should have put that in the chat before, but so the gameplay in that game Siberia is very similar to War for Earth, where it's like, yeah, it's like almost like quick time events, but they're not really. It's so frustrating in Siberia because there's no instructions on screen. You just like push a direction and he'll walk, and like that even in the first 10 minutes of the game, there's a point where you have to go down this hallway, and if you go forward into the hallway, boom, headshot, you're dead, game over. And I was like, "Okay, well, I guess I'm not supposed to go down that hallway yet." So I explore around a bunch, never found any other way. So I'm like, "Okay, well, let's go into the hallway, but instead of going forward, we're gonna go left." You go left, boom, headshot, dead. Like, alright. So then it's like, "Well, okay, do I go to the right down the hallway?" And it's like, boom, headshot, dead. I'm like, what am I supposed to do?" Like,
Yeah.
now, it wasn't until my older brother took the sticks and said, like, "Okay, what if we, like, peek in and then dip out?" So he, like, tapped forward and backward, like, really quickly, and that was what triggers the girl that shoots you in the head. She tries to pull her gun, but because you dipped out of the room, you could, like, grab her and restrain her, and that's how you progress the story forward.
That's
Now,
interesting.
how in the hell are you supposed to intuit that?
Yeah. That's pretty good. You know what that reminds me of? Did you ever play the Star Wars Rebel Assault games?
Hmm.
Because that's kinda like the same thing,
Yeah,
right?
same deal. Now
Okay.
but the Rebel Assault games, similar to War for Earth, they actually give you visual cues about what you're supposed to do. So
Ah,
here is actually a screenshot of War for Earth in gameplay mode. And so you can, like, select which weapon you wanna use, and you select which action you want to do, and it's very similar to that where it's like, okay, if you choose the wrong action, it's game over, but if you choose the right action, you continue the story along.
I think
So
I need to download this and stream myself playing it.
oh,
This
yeah, I
this
think
sounds like a lot of fun.
exactly. So if you can get it working,
Yeah, I'm gonna
let's
try.
definitely do that. But, still not the most exciting gameplay, right?
Right,
I
right.
think we could do better. So, moving on down the line here, this is from the PS1 title, just Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam. And the entire game is not in this view, unfortunately. This is a screenshot of, like, pre-mission, which I always love these things because it's like, the cockpit closes and screen
Oh, yeah.
comes up, and you get to, like, see the Zeta Gundam launching out onto the catapult. But the gameplay is basically just duels. Like, if you've ever played any of the Dragon Ball Z, not the original Budokai where it's like a fighting game, traditional fighting game side view, but like the Tenkaichi Budokai games where it's like the camera's positioned behind you and you're kind of like zooming in and fighting. That's exactly the combat here.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Now, that said, um, it does have limb destruction, which is pretty
Mhm.
impressive for the PS1 era of games.
And is this the one you streamed maybe 2 months ago or something like that?
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't get past the, level where you have to invade Jabro and fight off all these goofs and
Yeah, because I remember shortly after that, I downloaded to play it, and I will say, like, being able to look past the PlayStation graphics, it really does a good job of trying to portray the feeling of being in Zeta. Like, that was
yeah,
I think that's my first takeaway. Knowing the graphics, knowing the controls, it's like I at least it had that feeling. So this is a good example.
yeah. Now I'm seeing in the chat, Simply New Type asks if that previous game, War for Earth, was the one with the live action cutscenes. Yes, it
Yeah.
was. With, Gian and the Zax.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, here, 16 second, it says, that you need QuickTime to get War for Earth running. So,
Oh, okay, maybe that's the thing. Thank you. Haven't
yeah,
heard that
secrets
in a
unlocked.
long time.
Yeah, right? So, I figured I would, give that a shout out just so that you knew
Thank
and
you.
we, could come back to it later. Now, I'm glad that Johnny Tacoma brought up this one because oh, wait, I clicked the wrong chat here. Journey to Jaburo. Obviously, this is one that you would think is like the most Gundamiest Gundam game, right? You're playing as Amuro. You
Oh, yeah.
are basically recreating the first few arcs of the One-Year War. What did you think of this game when you played it?
I liked it. It's I feel like that's yeah, another good example. Like for me, it seems like there's these PS1, PS2 games where they were like following even Saturn. There's these games where they're kind of following the story, and it really makes you feel immersed. And again, it's like overlooking the graphics, even the outdated to a way controls. It still feels like it. It does the music, the way they're always big about using sound effects that sound like they would be from the show. And, something I want to keep in mind too is just I don't know how much this is something I was thinking about recently. When we talk about Gundam games, what is before and after the Bandai Namco merger? Like sometimes I
That's
try to think, does that
th
change what the output is?
I think you're probably onto something there because a lot of these games were, of course, outsourced to, like, third-party studios, and so we haven't even gotten into some of the more recent entries that are strictly controlled by, Bandai Namco,
And
right?
and I think the older ones were always retelling stories.
Yeah, yeah,
You know?
and, for me, I thought that the, controls of Journey to Jaburo were a little clunky compared to, like, some of the other games that were based on that same
Yeah.
engine, but I mean, I thought it was pretty good. Like,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely.
the only thing that I would say is that, like, you know, for me, I don't know if this was the case with you, but I definitely played it in such a way where I was, like, just basically always shooting. Like, I rarely ever got out the beam saber. It was just, like,
Yeah, that's the
so much
one where
easier to just side hop and
exactly, because I think that was the main thing was me getting over the control, like, the movement, and once I did, I found out, yeah, I can just kinda jump and shoot and, um, yeah.
yeah. Now, did you ever get to play, I think it's just Gundam the Best or Gundam version 1.5. Are you familiar with this one?
Oh, no. No.
So so Journey to Jaburo came out in what, like 2000? In
Mhm.
2005, there was a Japanese only, PS2 was it PS2? Yeah, it had to have been PS2, but there was a re-released version of Journey to Jaburo called version 1.5, and I think the subtitle was, like, Gundam the Best, which is kind of a
Oh,
goofy but it was basically Journey to Jaburo with some quality of life improvements.
interesting, but only released in Japan?
Yeah, only released in Japan. I have not played it myself, but I did, pick up a ROM, so I'm gonna give it a
Okay,
shot, and we'll
yeah.
see if it holds up, I don't
Yeah,
know.
curious.
We'll give it a shot.
Yeah.
Now, that said, we also have some weird entries in the Gundam game lexicon, something like Battle Assault, which, of course, is, 2D fighting game, so it's not really, you can't really recreate Gundam moments unless you pick very particular mobile suits and things like that, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if this jumps ahead, but, like, the Versus games? Especially that I think yeah, the PS4 versus, like, even though it's fighting, what I would do is I would purposely pick, the suit, like, I would have, like, the GPO 1 and make it the GPO 2 and then make it at the base, the Australia base, like, and
Yeah.
have it because it lets you do that, play the music. So I feel like,
Yeah.
yeah, in these older games, if it happens to be, like seeing the O and the Zeta Gundam, but then you see Hero piloting the O, and you're like, okay, well, so that could take you out. Otherwise, that might be a good example of kind of getting the essence if
Yeah.
it all aligned.
Ultronymous says, "Yes, I remember how Camille beat Hiro Yuri during the Grip War." It was a very famous moment. Um, but yeah, no, you're right. Like you can sort of recreate those moments if you intentionally do it, but you know,
Yeah. A lot of that, it takes work, and that gets you out of the experience of being able to just sit down and then immersing yourself, or something, yeah.
exactly. And so that I think that this is the right. Yep. So that brings me to my favorite game series. You just mentioned it, the Versus series.
Oh, okay.
For me, the PS2 era is the best version of that because you've got Federation versus Xeon, you've got Zeta Gundam, Gundam versus Zeta Gundam, and then you also have the Seed one, which yeah, Rengoku versus Zaft or something like that. These games actually did a very fantastic job of recreating those moments. Obviously, here we are, Amuro in the Battle of Obawaku. It's not overwhelming, like, you end up fighting, like, 1 or 2 mobile suits at a time, which is very in line with what you would expect in the show, and, of course, like you do in Battle Assault, you can create those games in, like, the versus mode, like, set up the stage, the mobile
Yeah.
suits, the pilots,
But
um
these early ones have a single player, mode where you're
They do.
going through the story, right?
Mhm.
'Cause see, I'm just used to the later ones, like on PS1, PS5, and the single players, if they do have, it's just kinda random. It's like, here's a random map,
An
here's some
arcade
random
mode,
people, here's a
yeah.
random song. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, it's funny you mention that because when I was kind of looking around for gameplay footage, I was specifically looking for, footage of somebody piloting the Gundam, fighting Char at the end of Federation versus Xeon. And what was funny is everything I found or during Federation run-throughs were the arcade mode. And so it was like a guy using a GM fighting against a Bravo, a Bigro, and a Zachrello. And I'm like, that didn't happen at a Baoku.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, that'd
Um,
be insane.
yeah, oh yeah. PS2 Federation versus Xeon wishes it had that detail. Yeah, true. This was definitely an emulated, upscaled version. But
Ah,
I think even like I still play the games on the classic hardware, and I think that they hold up pretty well. Like the texture work was done really well. Obviously there's tons of aliasing and things like that. Like you're gonna
right.
see pixels, but um I mean, surprisingly, they hold up pretty well, and I think that it shows that they used, like, that same animation and those same 3D models for all of the PSP and PS Vita entries, like Battle Chronicle, Battle this,
Oh,
Battle
yeah.
that, Battle Operation, Battle like,
Yeah.
there's, like, a whole series of Gundam battle games on the mobiles, which we could talk about those, but I think that just by the nature of them being on a handheld kind of takes that immersive aspect out of it. Would you agree with that? I know that you're a handheld guy.
Yeah, not necessarily, but, so I would say there is something, though, about playing a modern 3D game on a handheld during that time when it was limited, because it's like you're almost like, well, here's a limited scaled down 3D game, and sometimes that would take me out. Like, oh,
Yeah,
I know I'm playing the limited or the portable version. Now, that being said, I think by the time they got to the 3DS version, and I think because of the 3D, uh,
yeah,
but I think also with that one is it seems to generally follow a story, but you're just a random pilot. That's again a game where you would have to play the missions made to where you're picking Amuro and the Gundam and all that. So
yeah, very similar to, like, Xeonic Front
yeah,
or side stories where, yes, they may feel more Gundam-y, but
yeah,
yeah.
it's not the experience within it. Yeah,
So then We have some
Hmm,
of the, strategy games. I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't bring up something like,
yeah.
the G Generation games or, Gihren's Greed. I think Gihren's Greed is definitely a little bit more of like a fantasy because, like, you can the fact that you can make a Zombie Gundam basically kind of kills that kind of immersion. And as much as I love, like, the Universal Century mode in, Gundam versus Zeta Gundam, having all those different timeline splits,
Oh,
it does kind of it's like, well, now I'm not recreating moments in
yeah,
Gundam, I'm, like,
making
inventing
something
my
up.
own ones.
Yeah. So this is an interesting series to bring up because when I first got into them, the reason I was willing to play them was because it was Gundam, and it's very similar to like the tactic stuff I like Shining Force and all that. But what I did not like is how they introduce pilots and mobile suits that aren't even in Gundam, and but they're your main ones to use.
Yeah,
And
for the
yeah,
longest time, like,
yeah,
you have, like, just randos.
yeah, and I felt like I didn't understand that, and but I looked past that and I was like, well, I'm always gonna hunt for or upgrade the ones from the shows, and then you can play the missions
Exactly.
that recreate, and then I'll just not really think I won't use them in the front unless I just need to destroy something so I can follow along, with the story or whatever. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's a little weird that Amuro had a GPO-3 in my version of the Battle of Abaku, but
Yeah, it
it's
is
always nice
funny.
when you have those, like, those totally out of scale units that just wipe the map.
I know, and I wonder if they should do it in a way where it's like you just play the mission as it would have been, and once you beat it, it unlocks a mode to where then you can use whatever you want, and then has maybe modifiers for the challenges or something. Um,
That would be pretty cool.
yeah.
And I think that they kind of do that with they kind of do that in Zeonic Front because you can replay a lot of the missions when they're released into the simulator mode. So it's like you play the mission
Oh,
in the main game, and then you have the mission in the simulator mode. But in the simulator mode, you have access to like everything instead of just the stuff that you had in the story mode. So
you
you
know
can
what?
kind of
That's a good call out. I think Gundam yeah, typically does that with their games where they will have once you beat a mission, then it's sort of like unlocked in like a simulator mode where then you're up like isn't that even in
in
0081?
yeah,
Yeah,
0081, and I was gonna say side stories too on the
yes, that's
PS3.
yeah. I kind of like that. That's a good way to add replay value.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Definitely. Now I don't have footage of this, but another game that I guess deserves kind of an honorable mention would be SD Gundam Battle Alliance because I think that the gameplay in that is super fun, but just by the nature of it having an original story and having like this whole other cast, you're not recreating stories from the anime, you're doing something different, right?
Yeah, the only time that really worked for me is like if the music and the mission and the stage is based off of something and you just happen to be using or I would purposely use mobile suits that would be more effective there. Like, it can get out of hand really crazy,
Yeah,
but you can kinda, in some ways, kinda but they always have those, I forget what they're called, where
breaks like
yeah, good
yeah.
job, yeah, where they just, like, come through and then it kinda it's like, "Okay." Yeah.
But I do like how the special moves, like, they are ripped straight from the anime, right? Like, when you use the Gun Tank's special move, he does, like, the get on
Yeah.
all fours and or not Gun Tank, sorry, Gun Cannon. He, like, gets on all fours and does the shot, and then he throws the rock. It's like, "Oh, those are straight out of the anime."
Yeah,
Like
that's good stuff. And then, another one, on the Saturn, so and this is again back before like the merger, there was a Gundam game that was straight up just a side scroller of the first Gundam series. And for me, that was a good one because being a side scroller, especially my generation, that's just typically how we experienced games. So that's just the experience. But what it was each level was the next main beat of the story, next main beat of the story. The cutscenes would be animation that was made for that, and I think for a couple other games too. So to me, that's an example of like the ultimate immersion, like feeling like that is a very Gundamy thing. And even though it's a side scroller, it still has all these buttons for all the different weapons that you would. So it has that part of Gundam where the weaponry is still a big
yeah.
deal. Yeah.
I'm glad that you mentioned like old school side scroller games because while they were limited in the scope of like their technology, it's important to remember that a lot of the early games from that era like actually inspired stuff that we take for granted now. So like a famous example of that being Legend of Zelda 2, where all the combat areas were done in like side
Oh,
scroller,
yeah, that's right.
and the objective was, it was like, okay, if Legend of Zelda 1 was all about exploration and like building the map and finding hidden things, Legend of Zelda 2 was all about like the sword play and the combat. That's why you can do like the downward strikes. That's why you have all these different combinations to your point where it's like you have all of these tools in your arsenal, the different weapons, the different, well, in Gundam, you would be like different projectiles and stuff. In Legend of Zelda, it was like different magic spells and stuff like that. But because it was limited on the screen as like 2D side scrolling, that was just how you immersed yourself in it. Once we got to the 3D era of games and you get things like, Ocarina of Time, now all of a sudden you have this third dimension that you can play with where it's like, okay, now we can push the sword play into these awesome duels where it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, my favorite parts of Ocarina of Time were fighting the Lizalfos and the
Yep.
Stalfos because it was like, "Oh,
That
this
whole
actually feels like a back and forth sword fight."
Yeah, that whole time, like, how they really the Z targeting system and the whole, like, flipping to, like, dodge and to attack, like, to me, that was, like, the ultimate way to experience, like, a fight,
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, yeah.
Um, well, and speaking of, lots of enemies and that type of fighting style,
Oh.
Dynasty Warriors Gundam. Now, again, this is one of those ones where it's like, does it really count as a game that feels Gundamy? There are two things that kind of hold it back, in my opinion. One is the swarms of enemies. Like, you never see mobile suit combat on this scale, right?
Right.
Um, but on the flip side, the story modes are like, as long as you're playing like the story modes is not like the what do you call it, like ultimate mode, like that stuff. They have like the story modes where you can go through the series and like
Yeah.
recreate those battles, even to the degree of like, when you're playing through Zeta Gundam, there's like a moment where you have to like go and rescue Captain Henkin because Yazan is
Oh,
closing in to go fight Emma. So it's like you have those moments that are recreated in the game really well. But again, because of that ultimate mode, because of like the original story that like has all the crossover characters and everything, uh, it's not
yeah.
it's not the quintessential Gundam experience, right?
Yeah, I feel like it is almost there except for, like, what you brought up, which is the swarm of enemies, because then what you're really thinking about is that classic Dynasty Warriors gameplay of, "Okay, I need to clear this, I need to clear this, okay, I need to move here, I need to clear this," and
Yeah.
it's really less about it being its own thing. Yeah.
Um, yeah, Wallace here in chat brings up a good point. Is like it was fun, but did not feel like real Mobile Suit Gundam, and it does get boring after it. I mean, I've literally fallen asleep during now it was late at night, but but like I was playing Dynasty Warriors Gundam and I like fell asleep in mid battle just because it was like swipe, 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 shoot, swipe, 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 shoot, hit circle to do my special attack. It was like
That's the thing, as much as it seems this is fun, and I've had fun, I've played through and beaten the Reborn, and people love the series, and they just announced a new Dynasty Warriors. I still think it's like it's almost like, does everyone agree? Yeah, it's very shallow, but
yeah.
it's okay. This is my schlocky action movie. Like, is that? I wonder if that's how people really just see it in general.
And I think that there's room for that, right? Like,
Yeah,
not every
yeah,
game has to be this, tactically engaging thing like GBO2, but,
yeah.
you know
Sometimes, yeah, I'm like, what am I missing after like a few maps of Dynasty Warriors? And I'm like, oh, yeah, that was kind of fun, but I'm gonna move on. But yeah, it could be that it is fun just in short bursts, and that's what I'm afraid of with Gundam Breaker 4. Like,
yeah.
it's more about collecting and building, and it's got kind of that surface level action. I'm hoping it jives.
Yeah, there's a reason that the Gundam Breaker series didn't make my list here of just the ones that I was considering.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, and, it less so well, no, I mean, I think that Dynasty Warriors Gundam is guilty of this too. In the original Dynasty Warriors game, it's like it is super grindy because you end up playing the same missions over and over because you're just trying to collect different
Yeah.
weapons, different parts, different things like that. Same thing in Dynasty Warriors Gundam. It's like, oh, if I want to upgrade my Kshatriya, I need to keep playing this mission and break open all these boxes so I can collect parts. And it's like each part is like a loot box. So it's like you don't know if you're gonna get a good quality one. Like it's just so like gosh, gotta keep playing it
Right.
again.
Yep.
Is that not the same thing as Gundam Breaker where you're just kind of
Yeah.
grinding out these levels over and over and over again just to get, like, a part that you need for a suit?
Yeah, and that's very interesting to bring that up because that's the difference between that and maybe the gameplay of Versus, where I am then going to a match where it's the map I want with the music, with the guy, and I'm just focusing on that. It's not like, okay, I'm gonna play this, but I do have to grind for this at this level first and beat the and and then you're like out of the game and you're now going down your checklist of and kind of an example of this headspace that I think it creates is uh unrelated game. Star Wars Hunters just came out. It's
Oh,
a
yeah, how is that?
online shooter. It's actually pretty fun. It does quick little matches.
Okay.
But something happened. I didn't bring it up this morning on the Bluecast. Is as soon as the when I finished a match and it popped up with the battle pass and like what you can unlock, I felt this feeling of disgust for a second. Like, oh my god, this like this is now it's almost like there's something about like seeing these battle passes where it's like, okay, is this really about the game anymore?
Yeah,
Because then I'm like, okay, now I'm seeing my head. I think in the future, I'm like, okay, now if I'm playing this, I'm going to be doing it by the rules of the battle pass in order to be progressing anyway. And now I'm bound to this battle pass, not a Star Wars adventure.
exactly. I have a visceral reaction to seasons and battle passes for that reason, is it's like they, even with the best games, I feel like they take something away from it, you know? It just
Yeah,
it feels like trying to cash in on people's FOMO,
yeah.
which yeah, and credit where it's due. This is where GBO2 is fantastic because they don't
Oh yeah.
have like, they have special events and stuff like that. Obviously they have their moments where it's like, "Hey, time to cash in your tokens because if this is a suit that you want." But it's not like you have to engage with that system if you don't want to.
Yeah, you bring up a good point because the first 3 years of 2 years of GBO2, I wasn't even engaging with the systems because I didn't know how, but I was having fun just playing the game.
I
That's a
know.
really good point you bring up.
One of my
Uh,
favorite stories is Talos looking at your DP count and saying like,
oh, yeah.
"You just buy everything. Buy every single part in the shop. You're an idiot." Like,
Yeah, that was so funny because I was like, "I don't know what I should spend my money on," so I just didn't, and it's not like I felt I needed to because I was ranking up,
yeah, it's
ah, because the game is very well made, I think,
it
for that.
is. It
Yeah.
is. And yeah, I mean, not to dump on Gundam Breaker too much. Like obviously it is a fun game. Johnny Tacoma says like it's the ultimate Bandai experience, not the ultimate Gundam, which I think is a
That is
fair.
very well said.
Yeah.
I think I agree with that too. So I think, yeah, for someone that's really into the model kits more than they really care about the universe, um, yeah, having something like Gunbreaker 4 where it's not about the combat. It's about the combat's just a means to the Gunpla
Yeah.
part of it. So that's a really good point. Um,
Um Here we go. I just want a gun. I just man, I'm getting all tongue tied on this one. I just want a game where weapons and beam sabers damage like the anime. And this is from 16 and second. Beam sabers, not beat sabers. Yeah. Um,
well, you know what would be cool too on top of that is where what if you had to manage the energy output to the point to where you might not have enough energy to use your beam saber then.
that's a very good point. Like, and you and I've talked about this with regard to like 0081 compared to other games. Is like in 0081, you have a fixed ammo count. If
Yeah.
you waste your ammo, then you're stuck with just a beam saber. One of the things that they've never done in any Gundam game, as far as I know, is limiting the beam saber to a limited amount of time where then it has to go back in the saber rack to charge.
Yeah, that along with your thruster output, like, having to manage that, like, what if you're in a battle and let's say it's like a Souls-like to where you lose all the time, but then it's like, "Okay, I have to manage it just right," and you learn how to, like, when should you really use your beam saber?
Yeah.
When should you not like, "Well, I have all these guns, I'll just use this, that, this," but yeah, managing that energy output, it moving everything. Like, what if the right stick, you hold down a button and then right stick all of a sudden is managing your power levels. And it's like, okay, then I'm gonna put everything in thruster so I can thrust away real quick. Um,
That's pretty sweet.
that would be really neat. Yeah.
I like that. Um, and then, Robert says, "What about creating a fan fiction visual novel game of Gundam?" I
Hmm.
mean, that would be I'm not personally into visual novels, but I do know that there is a huge market for them. People really enjoy that type of storytelling, and I mean, it could be pretty immersive. Like, what we need is we need slap vision, right?
Ah,
So what I wanna do is I wanna create, like, a slapping, like a third party accessory that
it's
you
like
can
a
plug into
hand
your
that you set up on a stand.
exactly, and so then as you're playing through as Amuro, when you get to the dialogues with Bright, it's, gives you a pop every now and again.
Well, here's something funny. I forget the name of the game. It just came out. I think it's Devolver Digital, but it's just a slapping game where it has this production value where it's like these people like are facing off, and then you could choose what you say and then how you slap them.
So
Um,
it's like those slap competitions that they have, like, in Las Vegas and stuff where
I guess, but it has the visual novel element. So it's like
it's
you're
so
yeah, so it's almost like what you just explained, except without a third party accessory. So it's the story where these characters are talking to each other, and then you battle by slapping, exchanging slaps.
see, that needs a PvP add-on because that would be
Well, okay, so going back to this visual novel thing, what was coming through my head was, what if the game is a squad, a mobile suit squad, and there's 5, you pick one of the 5, and then the rest of the game is like just the visual novel of just talking to whether it's in the cafeteria, in the hangar, you're just like talking to the different squad, the engineers, and like learning about everyone's story. And it's not really about going out to battle. It's about being on this ship, during all that. So,
there you go.
yeah.
Well, yeah, so now this is a good question. So Jam Calax, thank you for the super chat. Appreciate you. For $2 says War for Earth is like Dragon's Lair or Space Ace.
Yep.
So now I've never played either of those. Have you?
Yeah, and so they're pretty much like animation, like you're watching something, but you like come up to a scene where you have to do something and you don't it's like where you don't know. You could make a decision, then it's wrong and you die. So when you go back through it again, you're like, oh, I have to choose this way. But it's played out like in an actual animation. Um
Got you.
and
So
it's
yeah,
really cool animation. It's like late 70s maybe or 80s
so
style animation.
so yeah, that would be like the predecessor to like Siberia.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, hey, thank you for the super chat. Actually, another one
Yeah.
from Jamcal X is a point and click Gundam adventure, which I mean, that's kind of in that same vein of like, computer games that have that limited interactivity, right? Like kind of like a
Yeah.
text-based adventure where it's like,
Or like
go
King's Quest.
north.
Did
Oh
you ever
yeah.
play, like, the King's Quest games? So that's my
Yeah.
thought, like, you see, like, the scene and then your Gundam there, and then you click for him to keep going, and then you just type, "Pull out beam saber," and I mean, who knows what would really happen, but,
Get ye beam saber. Um no, see, man, now I'm like I'm really kind of invested in this visual novel idea. Not so invested that I'm gonna make one, but
I know, but I think there's something there, like, I don't care to play visual novels, but I feel like it would be fun to make one, and but again, where we're coming from here is we're really trying to get to the essence of Gundam, like, we're almost, like, wanting to retell the excitement we get from Gundam, you know?
yeah, and it's a marriage of all of these different elements, right? Like there has to be the story, there has to be certain mechanics that really put you in the cockpit, no pun intended,
Yeah,
of the Gundam and like recreate that experience. And that's where it's like, for me, War for Earth wouldn't cut it necessarily. Or even like, some of the tactics games like the G generation games, even though they faithfully recreate the story
right.
perfectly, it's like, well, but I'm just kind of dragging and moving my uh
Yeah,
moving my
exactly.
units around.
Yeah.
Um Now, like you said, I think that and here we go. So Jam Calyx pointed out like Gundam Souls, like you were talking about, like a Souls like Gundam game.
Yeah.
I think that there is potential there to like if that were to exist, Why wasn't Unicorn that? But whatever.
Yeah, because a lot of feeling that I get from Gundam that I think you could recreate in Souls is that feeling of dread when you're in space, because you're in these machines out in space. There's so much risk for death, like, at any
Oh
moment.
yeah.
Those people that are pilots going into space, it's like, that's amazing, and then especially when you have pilots in space that there's this background emotion and drama, and it's like, wow, someone is going to die because we're in space. It's not like we're on land in a field and two people are mad and then they can run away from each other. They're in these mobile suits in space. And so to be able to recreate that in Souls, I think would be the main thing.
And I can't think of any space games that fully recreate that that
The dread, like that you could die out in space.
yeah, yeah.
Something, yeah.
There's a segment in Mass Effect 2 that I think does a really good job of it because a lot of it's the ambience, right? Like the fact that, it's so quiet because there's no sound in space, and so I remember in, like, the early parts of Mass Effect 2, and this isn't a spoiler, so, Adam, you can still go play it and enjoy
Yeah.
it. I still can't believe you haven't gone through the Mass Effect series yet. Um so you're on the ship, everything's normal, and then gets attacked, and the hull gets blown open, and you can actually like see out in space, and you're moving really slowly because you're not, you don't want to get pulled out into space. But everything's super quiet, like everything's muffled. You can't, you can't hear what's going on, but you see all of this carnage and mayhem going on. And so it really does create that ominous feel that you get, and I never played, like, the Dead Space games. Are the Dead Space games like that? I feel like they
They
should be.
Yeah, they do a good job of that too, but because it takes more of the Event Horizon Lovecraftian style ambience feeling of space, which
Yeah,
but you know
I
what?
love it.
Real quick, when you were describing that, it reminded me of something I really liked about Return of the Jedi, and it's when that moment where it's Luke, Vader, and the Emperor. Like, this is that drama I was talking about that happens, like the main titular
Yeah,
drama. But then in the background, out the Death Star window, you can see the battle taking place. And that just
love that.
further reinforced like what was going on here. And I love it when a game can do that. Like, yeah, I hear people describe Mass Effect the way you did, where those moments happen.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I'll have to try that out.
definitely. And I think that kind of, ambience inside of a mobile suit where it's like, because you wouldn't be hearing what's going on out in space. All you would hear is, like, you clicking on the controls, and then maybe, like, you hear, like, the tinny, like, "Oh, Amuro, she could have been like a mother to me," and it's, like, coming in over your intercom, like,
Yes. Hearing the intercom sounds.
yeah.
Or the lack of sounds like you described. That reminded me, I'm gonna bring this up. Exo Squad, okay? I did a video about it,
There
but
you
no,
go.
they're the first episode when this crew has to go out to check the ship, and then it's about to blow, so they have to leave, and they can't communicate with the other team, so they're like, "Let's just fly by their ship to try to get them to follow us." And then as they start following, you just see the blast come from behind, and then just as it reaches the ship's just gone. And then you just the look on the face, like, that whole crew just died, like, for a kids show, like,
It's
I was impressed.
pretty intense.
Yeah. I mean, I say kids show, but I'm gonna have to go back and say no, just for a cartoon that happened beyond during a child's time slot.
Yeah,
But
it's, I always go back to that idea that, like, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, all these cartoons were just, like, 22-minute toy commercials. Um, but it is kind of inspiring that people kind of jumped on that opportunity to make them something more than that.
exactly.
Gundam is obviously a great example, Exo Squad's a great
Yeah.
example.
Hey, you know what? Yeah, that is a good point, because I wonder if that's why I didn't bother getting into Gundam the whole time, because there's always been that sort of surface barrier that if you weren't as open-minded, you just saw this as just oh, this is
Yeah,
just giant robots from Japan selling toys or whatever.
right. Cartoons are for
Um,
kids.
I mean, and then even the same with Exo Squad, like, even looking at it, like, it's like, this is, not it's not gonna be interesting for me to take in, but then when you watch it, it's like, "Oh my god, this is amazing." Yeah, so yeah, it really is where when people are actually tasked to then, "Hey, make a story for our toy," it's probably people are like, "Hey, I've always wanted to tell something like this. Let's see if we can get it in." I mean, that's the story behind Gundam and Exo Squad, X-Men also.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting.
Absolutely, and I've always said, like, this was this is what my, thesis was on in grad school was, like, the impact of narrative in marketing, right? So, for me, the the stories are not necessarily just about, telling a good story, but it's also, like, teaching kids how to play with the toys. So, one of the big
Mm,
challenges, and this is what I referenced in my paper, was one of the big challenges that they were having with the Diaclone toy line with, like, Transformers was that, like, kids were like, "Well, why would I want a car that turns into a robot? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like, I don't like, what am I supposed to do with it?" And so it wasn't until like the Marvel Comics and Bob Budiansky created this story like, "Oh no, it's not just a car. This is an Autobot and they protect the Earth from these Decepticons that are like warlike vehicles," which is why the Decepticons were always jets and tanks and the Autobots were cars.
yeah.
And it was like, "Oh, I get it now. Now I know how to play with these figures." And it's the same sort of thing with Gundam. It's like, okay, you can create like a figure of a giant robot, but you know,
Yeah, and those are good examples of one and I'm not saying anything bad about Transformers, but one, they really thought about telling a story that was interesting with Gundam, and Transformers like, "Well, let's tell a story that kids can follow."
yeah.
Whereas that is cool, but then can
But
that
it's
kid
so
grow
surface
up with
level,
that?
like, it's just
And
good guys and bad guys.
yeah, exactly. And I was thinking, yeah, Transformers is still really big, but with a specific demographic, you know?
True, very
Very
true.
interesting.
Now I see everybody, chatting in here about, a Gundam JRPG. Johnny Tacoma brought it up, JamKLX said MS Saga, which, you know, you and I both have in the same way that a lot of people, are quick to dismiss anime as, like, a kid's medium, you and I are quick to dismiss JRPGs.
Yeah, as just a book I'm supposed to read. Slaughter. But I do want to play through that game because the time where I have, and I don't think I can name one off the top of my head, a Japanese RPG that I have played through and beat, I've enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Can't
yeah.
really think of one, but I know it's happened.
No, I mean, I enjoyed Legend of Dragoon, and my personal favorite JRPG is Vagrant Story, just because it adds that extra element of, sort of tactical positioning to
Oh,
the
yeah.
traditional JRPG formula, but
Yeah, because then I would say Shining Force and Fire Emblems, or Fire Emblems are the only ones I can think about. Those are the less they're more of the tactical nature. Yeah.
yeah, um, but yeah, so y it does the perfect Gundam game exist yet? I'm gonna say no, you know
Yeah, it's something that I think maybe it did until we've seen what is possible with video games now. Like, yeah, maybe the late 90s, early 2000s, maybe there was a perfect Gundam game. I think those PlayStation games were and the Dreamcast game, those were awesome. But nowadays we see what's possible. And instead we get like Gundam Evolution and SD Gundam Battle Alliance. And it's like, when are we gonna like really show what Gundam is capable of, as a
I
game?
love this joke from, not to derail the conversation, but I
Huh?
love this joke from, JamCalX, JRPG, AKA playable young adult novels for emotional teens and me.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But yeah, going back to what you were saying, yeah, I think that we see so much invested in pushing hardware and graphics and not enough in pushing, like, the immersive aspects of video games where and I saw, King Dylan mentioned, like, Fallout and Skyrim, and it's like, I'm a huge fan of the Bethesda games, but, like, their AI has 0 sense of self-preservation. It's hilarious when you, like, are playing Skyrim, and even, like, the big, bad, powerful Lich, when you get it down to, like, almost 0 health points, he's just still sitting there, like, hacking away at you like he's gonna do something.
Oh, like not changing up tactics or
Yeah, yeah, there's no, it's definitely
oh,
not as immersive as like a Souls boss, right? But yeah, I mean, everything about Unreal Engine, it's like, oh, how much more realistic can we get the textures? Like, is
yeah.
there a way that we can render this pimple on this character's face? Like, and at
And
the
I
end of the
was
day, it's the same third person action games that we've been getting for the last like 10, 15 years. But
Yeah, I was so surprised with how good the graphics were in SD Gundam Battle Alliance. I was like, "I don't think they need to do all these, particle effects for this, but okay," you know?
Yeah, go off. Um, but and that's where I've become more appreciative of like stylized games and pixel art games, and I think most people are like you see this huge appetite among gamers for these like retro styled games because
Yeah.
the stylized look is kind of what we want. Like we don't necessarily want something that's hyper realistic.
Yeah, even when it comes to, like, Metrovanias, like, which are still really popular, like, you can see where it's not that they're going back to an old style of that, but I think it's easier to make an older style look artistically great than it is to do cutting edge graphics and then, on an indie budget and trying to make that look good, it's a hard part, I think, of deciding on that. But yeah, when you're a big company like Bandai, you can put all the graphics money into something like SD Gundam Battle Alliance for some reason. Yeah.
Exactly. And so King Dylan mentions cell shaded games,
Oh
and
yeah.
I mean, cell shaded games such as like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, where the gameplay is elevated above the game look, right? Like it's the physics interactions, it's playing with the AI because like, the different enemy types have different AI behaviors. Like you'll have enemies that chase you to the ends of the earth, and then you have enemies like bokoblins that'll run away if they don't have a weapon and they go to pick up the nearest weapon and things like that. These are things that you don't see in more how should I phrase this? Because obviously Legend of Zelda games are AAA games, but, like, the
I know
graphic
what you mean. You don't
fidelity
see
is
this
not
in
that
like the
chief.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
general pushed out AAA yearly, here you go. You're right on point. The way they cell shading graphics are done on a spectrum. The way
yeah,
it's done in Breath of the Wild is perfect because as you're talking about when you're describing like the enemies running away, like you're seeing what would look like bad graphics. It's still a little, but a little better because the cell shading kind of takes that edge off, but gives you something nice to look at and you can follow along with it. Um, and we've talked
yeah.
about that with, like, 2D animation with, like, Mario, how they have to, like, get that done just right to make it feel good.
And there's something to be said about, like, the reduced graphical fidelity being an advantage because I was just watching a video, by the founder of Naughty Dog about how they made Crash Bandicoot, and they were like, "Well, yeah, we could have packed in all these textures, but what we realized at the time," and this wasn't in the dev kit for the PS1, is they were like, do you realize that by an order of magnitude, rendering a just base material, like a colored material, was 10 times faster than rendering a textured material. And so they wanted to dedicate 30% of all of the on-screen resources to animating Crash Bandicoot, which meant they needed to strip down anything that was, too crazy, which meant instead of coloring him using like hand-painted textures, they just rendered him in a color.
Interesting, and it
Now,
worked. It
yeah,
works for that
and
style.
similar to that, when you have a game like Breath of the Wild where everything is just colors and not like heavily rendered textures, you can show a lot more on screen and you don't have issues like what was happening with PC players on Elden Ring, where it was like, because there
Oh,
was
yeah.
so much graphically on screen, because it is a beautiful game,
Yeah.
but it's rendering all of these faraway textures at maximum fidelity when it can't even render the
Yeah,
enemies
I
that are
know.
supposed to be like within range of attacking.
And I
So
heard that got fixed,
they did patch it.
well, in terms of when they were porting it to Steam, like because it's a shader compilation thing, and
Yeah,
so through the Proton layer, they were able to just, "Okay, well, we'll make it where the shaders are compiled by the time then you run your game."
exactly.
And that's very interesting that then no one does that on Windows but I've seen shaders done so differently in different games for some reason, I don't get it.
It's true.
Yeah,
But, yeah, I mean, this conversation went, a little deeper, and honestly, that's what we do here, right?
that's what we
Like,
do here.
we a little deeper. But, yeah, that's what we do here is we take something as simple as what makes a good Gundam game, and then we start kind of breaking apart, like, each of these individual mechanics and how they contribute to making, you know
And and we talk about it more than we hear the people that hold Gundam dear talk about it because I think that it should be an open conversation, like, what does it mean as a Gundam game? What are they trying to do? What do people want? And
Yeah,
you know,
because I think that typically the conversation tends to be a little bit too, surface level. People are just like, "This game sucks, I don't like it," and it's like, "Well, why don't you like it? What is it that you're trying to achieve from this game?" "Well,
yeah,
GBO2 is hard." And it's like, "Well, yeah, but it's
yeah,
also really good."
yeah, yeah. No, that's a good one. It's very much surface level. Yeah,
Um, but yep, that is all the time we have for today. Hopefully, if I didn't mention the games that you think are the best Gundam representation, then definitely drop them in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for chatting with us and for all of your recommendations. Hopefully, I got to all of them. I don't think I missed any. But thanks again to JamCalX for the super.
yeah,
And if you haven't, go watch Adam's video breaking down the top 5 Zaku fights
yeah,
in animation,
yeah.
specifically
No,
animation. I have to put
I
that
haven't gone through
caveat
all the manga yet, so I know
in
someone out there would be like, excuse me."
there. All right. Well, thank you guys again. I will shout at you later. Have a good rest of your day.
See y'all.